If you don't say anything in the meeting, then I better not hear anything afterwards. And I better not hear anything like, well, I knew that wouldn't work. You need to do what I call a public hanging. You call it out and you say, that's out of bounds. Don't do that again. If you can't do that, then you can't be here. You only got to do it once. The path of least resistance is to make the hard call up front. Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines, to those that are driving those changes. I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And with me is a self-proclaimed bumbler. Before we started recording, that's what he told me. And he's a little quiet, but other than that, we love him. So Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say good morning? Of course, yourself, the guest topic, and then our sponsors, and then we're going to jump into it.
Well, you didn't explain the bumbler, but you can if you like.
Yeah.
It was a bonehead move. I fell off a chair and hurt my back, and it wasn't at a crazy party. It was just doing something.
The only
So
question is it on YouTube? Because if it's not
it's
on
not
YouTube,
on YouTube. I was
yeah.
by myself. It was one of those things where you fall down, nobody's home, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, if I would have died, I'd be laying here," and probably everybody would walk just right past me until they realized. Anyway, I'm all good. Well dosed up on Advil. Got a little back brace on, So, when you're as rough and tough as I am, it's all good. Anyway, let's go. It's Dan Gordon from PCO Bookkeepers and M&A Specialists. We do back office CFO work as well as exit planning. And let's see. I'd like to introduce the topic and the guest for today. So Donnie was responsible for writing this on the document, and our guest for today is guest, and our topic is topic. So the guests today actually are our two favorite guests, and that's us, Donnie and I. And the
Yep.
topic, and this is a perfect topic for the conversations we've been having. It's about conflict and how to handle conflict. And I don't mean in your marriage, I mean in a business setting, right?
So the official topic is no more artificial harmony, master conflict, and build a better company. So
Where did I
that's the
see
topic.
that? Is that
It's in the topic line at the top, but we're gonna move on.
okay. It's not in the guest and topic. Anyway, we're pretty excited to have our four sponsors, the best of the best. Coalmarch, partner with the team fueling growth for pest and lawn pros. Coalmarch helps you scale smarter. Get your first month free. It's coalmarch.com/podcast. And for more than 40 years, Sure has been protecting pest control companies, specialized insurance safety programs because no one understands our industry better. Learn more at pestsure.com. Voice for Pest, one of our terrific sponsors that Triangle uses all of these guys, right? Voice for Pest delivers the only phone solution designed specifically for pest and lawn care professionals, from powerful AI features to deep integrations with most industry CRMs. Discover why leading companies rely on it every day. And I saw them at the WorkWave show, and they're pretty excited. They have some cool stuff. Learn more at Voice for Pest /podcast. And Forshaw is the leading family-owned operated distributor for pest management professionals since 1961. They focus on people and performance, and they have a really cool program called Foresight, Forshaw Foresight. And Donnie, it's an inventory management system.
That's correct.
To bring clarity, inventory control, and support smarter operations and decision. Learn more at forshaw.com. And
Awesome.
I just have one more, the peer groups. And by the way, you're not supposed to fast forward past all of this stuff. Make sure that make sure that you listen to it and support our sponsors.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in joining a PMP industry peer group, which is really catching steam, we've got, I don't know, 6 groups, and we have a whole bunch of guys. It's really a lot of fun. Facilitated by industry veteran David Billingsley. Please visit pmpindustryinsider.com /peer groups But you could also listen to episode 238 with Caleb Cunningham of Justice Pest. Caleb is killing it, and
Yeah, he's doing
he's
great.
a member of one of our peer groups, and he did a special interview with us and around the peer groups, and it was terrific. So let's do the intros and bios. The intro to Donnie is,
Oh gosh.
uh,
Well, you need to move on. Yeah, yeah.
uh,
I actually want to. I actually want to start this episode off with the story, and you're probably going to get. You're probably going to laugh at this, Dan, and it's totally,
Corso.
totally me just having complete unawares before I did something, and it kind of got me in trouble. So I'm not going to mention where this is at or how it all came about, but as you can imagine here at Triangle, I feel like we have a decent culture. I mean, there's always areas we can improve. There's always areas that we're doing well. But one of the things years ago, I read this book called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. We've had him on the podcast, and there was a chapter in there that really stuck out to me, and it was basically mastering conflict and this whole idea, that, you always have conflict in your company. The only question is kind of where it happens. And if you're intentional about it and you manage it very, very well, you get better decisions. If you don't manage it well, then you get politics. And so in that book, there's this whole practical system on how you create healthy conflict, how you prevent it from getting bad or having bad conflict, and then using debate ultimately to create better decisions and create alignment. And so that's been our culture for like, I don't know, 4 years, maybe 3 or 4 years, where we get meetings, and I'm talking specifically on our leadership team, and it's kind of brutal, right? We're like, hey, that's a really dumb idea or something like that, and it's not like no one's like taking it personal. No one's like everyone gets like we all have a high level of trust, and so it's just kind of like the way that we communicate. It's not. And so anyway, you got to imagine like this is my world, right? This is every week to week. This is what we do. No big deal. So I roll into another organization, nonprofit. I sit on the board. Well,
Are
Dan,
you
you said
talking
it on.
about, and when
You,
you
you
said
said it.
nonprofit, are you talking about Triangle or?
No, 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 not talking about trying the Lord. No, let's hope not. No. And Dan, you've obviously set in with me in peer groups, and so I don't run away from hard issues. I mean, sometimes, depending on the person, I
It's
will
like
take different
lassoing
approaches.
you.
Yeah. So I'm in this meeting and someone's pontificating about this great new strategy. And while they're talking, I'm like, this is ridiculous. And so we finally get done. It's like, what do you think? I'm like, that's got to be the dumbest idea I think I've ever heard. You
So
talk about not reading the room. And this person got visibly upset. And I was like, for a moment, I just completely forgot, like, hey, wait a minute. I don't have this kind of culture with these people. They don't really know who I am. You know what I mean? And know that like, even though I'll say that, like we can still be buds, right? And it created a big issue. Like it was like it took me almost a month to kind of it took me about a month to kind of cover it up and anyway, so point being is that
my wife says I'm insensitive, but go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, this whole idea, I guess the point is that um it's in one regard, it was a good thing because it kind of reminded me that, hey, you have a good culture where people can speak freely and talk about ideas and no one's getting upset. And hopefully that helps you make better decisions. Um, and this other idea of where I know for me, I have very much had bad conflict here at Triangle. And so the whole idea behind this episode is that how do you as an owner or a manager or whatever, whatever your role is at your company, how do you embrace this whole idea of conflict and use it as a leadership tool, not as a personality trait? I mean, some people create conflict just to create conflict. They're chaos creators. I mean, we can go on into politics and folks that use it for that. We're not, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is as a leader, understanding that conflict can be good and conflict can be bad, but using it as a leadership tool to help you make better decisions, help it to kind of surface things that people aren't willing to say in meetings. Because I don't know about you, Dan, I've sat in meetings where people are all thinking the same thing, but no one, they want to be nice and not hurt someone's feelings, and they don't bring it up, and ultimately the business hurts. And so what we want to talk about in this episode is how do you as a leader first of all, encourage conflict, but then once you encourage it, manage it so it's a positive for your business, it's a positive for your leadership team, and ultimately, draws everyone closer together and turns into a real positive for your business. Because I have, unfortunately, managed this improperly, and some of the conflict has gone bad. So, and it ended up hurting the business. And so, I think that's kind of the setup. Dan, any words of wisdom before we get into this? Because I can think of several ideas, even in peer groups, where this is we've had good
Been
conflict
there, done that.
and we've
That's
had
all
bad
I gotta
conflict.
say. Been there, done that.
I can think of one
Where
peer group meeting where a guy got so mad I thought it was going to come to blows. But anyway,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. Well, that was a peer group meeting, but with
yep,
our team at PCO Bookkeeper,
yeah,
sometimes a
yeah. So
little too forward with my thoughts, but
yeah.
yeah, that works.
Well, let's first of all let's get into what good versus bad conflict means.
Mhm.
And when you think about it with your leadership team, and there's a disagreement or there's an argument. First of all, if you're not having any disagreements, and you think that everyone in the if you have a leadership team and no one ever debates, there's no argument, you have a real issue at your business and you want to get to the end of it. Sometimes people believe, unity and everyone just being in the same boat means no conflict and no one disagrees. And that really is what's telling you is that communication has broken down and that you have a real problem. And so when we talk about good conflict, what you really want is people start debating ideas. They start debating trade-offs because in business there's always trade-offs, right? You can have this but not that, and if you do this, then that's going to suffer. And so ideas, trade-offs, priorities, standards, but definitely not personalities. Um, you know, and the other part I would say that's really good about or what makes conflict good is that if it's direct, candid, and in the room. Where it gets bad is when people are discussing someone else outside of the room, where someone is being indirect, um, or someone is not very candid, and so it's hard to understand exactly what they're saying. And then the last piece of good conflict. So there's this whole idea of what you have conflict about. There's how you do the conflict, and then this is the key part is that it ends with a clear decision. And this is where you as an owner, you have to be super, super clear about that is absolutely your role. Sometimes I see owners who think that they run a democracy, or some of them think that they run like they're looking for overall sentiment, and then that's what they're going to do. But you got to understand, and I think this is a really important part about when we talk about good conflict. Conflict is there to drive data so that you or whomever's in the room is going to make the decision, and not that everyone has to agree with it. Because sometimes, you know, you're going to have to make a decision that's unpopular. And if you can't get everyone okay with the idea that while at the end of the day, they may think one thing, you're actually the decision maker. And I've seen that kind of backfire as well. And so, and the follow up to that is they've got to be big enough to, whenever that decision gets made, everyone's unified behind the execution. And those are hard things to do. I covered a lot there. I mean,
Well,
it
the one
takes
thing
a
that I pulled out is the whole thing about the democracy, right? So you go in as the leader and you know what you're going to decide, but
maybe. Yeah.
but you might, and you're going to get, hopefully you're going to get some conflict because you don't want a bunch of yes men or yes women around you, right?
Right.
But then your job is to either convince or make them understand your position. And that's the decision that's going to be made because I agree with you. Business is not a democracy. Uh,
Correct. Correct. And I want to be clear. I mean, I don't want
you
folks
don't
when
want to
you
be a
listen
hard
to
ass. I mean, that's
exactly right. I mean, but you got to like you want to make sure that everyone understands that ultimately this conflict is going to end in a clear decision and everyone's going to be unified behind it, which means if there's conflict, there's going to be people who agree with it and there's going to be people who don't necessarily agree with it. But ultimately, once a decision gets made, everyone's behind making sure it happens. And if you don't have folks on your leadership team that are big enough to do that, then you may want to consider like the whole GWC episode that we did. I don't know, it was probably a year ago or whatever. You can look in our old archives and find it, but the whole get it one at capacity, because obviously there's a capacity issue. And so that's good conflict. Let's talk about what bad conflict means. And I've actually seen this. I've done it. Unfortunately, I've learned from it, Lisa. But I don't tolerate it anymore. And those are things that are pretty common, like you would see in a high school fight, right?
Yeah.
These are like, personal attacks, someone using sarcasm. Someone, I mean, I can be really sarcastic. I feel like I've gotten better as I've aged. I've been much more,
You
um,
are an amateur. I
uh,
am.
see, I would use sarcasm right now, but I'm going to not do that. I'm going to
Yeah.
demonstrate good.
No.
But anytime someone takes something personal, if they're being sarcastic, where they're just wanting to fight and bicker and not really deal with the issue. Anyone who's kind of scorekeeping, like I got to win no matter what, or the one that I love is blaming other people. You and I have had this discussion a lot, where I see this frequently with new managers, where something happens and it's super easy for them to blame the person versus, really examining the system. Like, so for example, if there's like a marketing failure or if there's an operations failure, something happens that, we either lose money, lose time, whatever. And then they're going to be, well, that person just didn't follow the process, or this person didn't do that, or whatever. That's the easy decision, and that's the easy scapegoat. For me, that's bad conflict. What is real conflict is when someone says, well, why did that happen, and start going deeper. Is it truly a person issue? Is it a system issue? And whenever I see someone, especially a manager, doing something like this, I immediately go to, okay, they're not taking ownership. We got a big issue here. But then, so those are the obvious ones. I want to talk a little bit about the not so obvious ones, and that you got to really watch, because nice people are notorious for doing this. And I don't know. I'm not saying I don't like nice people, but I will say that you got to watch them. You got to
Bless
watch
your
them.
heart.
But I mean, it's true, right? So another kind of bad conflict would be passive resistance, right? After the decision is made, like they agree in the meeting, but then they don't follow through. Or if they follow through, it's kind of halfway.
Hmm.
That are those are the ones you got to really watch, because to your face they're like, yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, that's what we agreed on. But then they're like slow, or they're like not really bought in, or whatever. That passive resistance, that's bad. That's still conflict. It's just not in your face. The other one would be kind of the meeting after the meeting behavior, where it's like a decision gets made, but then there's two or three people that get together after that and say, well, we don't really believe in that. Here's what we're going to do. That is a really, really bad, or that kind of conflict in your company needs to be dealt with, and you need to make sure that you don't allow it. At the end of the day, the thing to keep in mind is that, good conflict is uncomfortable now and it saves you later, whereas bad conflict, it avoids discomfort and then bills you later. And so you want to make sure that you don't allow, um, I guess the main thing is get the discomfort up front and walk through it versus waiting, because what happens is that if everyone's feeling good and no one wants to disagree and no one wants to say what the obvious is, it's going to hurt the business probably worse long term, rather than if you just as a leadership team gotten everything out on the table and just dealt with it right then. So, all
So
right, I'm running out of breath.
how do you right the ship when somebody practices bad conflict?
You call
And
them out. You call them out. Like literally, you have a discussion with them and say, I've actually had this happen sometimes, where we'll have a meeting, and it's been a while. It hasn't happened recently, thank goodness, and it could happen again, which is where, you know, you're in a meeting and a decision gets made, and then let's just say for whatever reason that decision doesn't work, or it's the wrong decision, right? And then you're having a discussion with someone on the team, and later on they're like, yeah, yeah, I knew that wouldn't work, and I knew this, and I knew that. And during the meeting, they kept their mouth shut. That infuriates me, because
Mhm.
I'm like, why didn't you say something? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, what are you? And so this whole idea of when you see something like this happening, training your folks, and then ultimately, it comes down to leading well, which is where, you know, if you don't say anything in the meeting, then I better not hear anything afterwards. And I better not hear anything like, well, I knew that wouldn't work or whatever, because that means you're actively working to undermine the business, is what I tell people. And so it's really, some of these behaviors, they're almost like, they're unconscious, right? They're people are so used to doing them, they don't realize like how damaging it can be to the business. And so the whole idea here is that if someone's doing something like the easy ones like personal attack, sarcasm, blaming, scorekeeping, those are immediate, and you need to do what I call a public hanging. A public hanging is if someone does that in a meeting, you call it out and you say that's out of bounds. Don't do that again. If you can't do that, then you can't be here. And oftentimes you only got to do it once, and then people realize like, okay, that's not going to happen. But that's when a public hanging is in order, is when someone does something, like, because if someone makes a personal attack towards someone or they're very sarcastic, first of all, they're probably not mature enough to be on any kind of manager team or or a leadership team. If you're doing this with service technicians or whatever, you still need to do a public hanging, because ultimately we're all adults, and if you can't act like an adult, then you can't be here, right? That's just what it is. These back channeling, passive resistance after a decision, those types of things, I would say you need to call it out. And if there's a pattern of it, then it goes back to the whole GWC. You probably need to make a change. I'm not saying, sometimes these things, as long as you address it, like if someone does it once, I'm not saying whether they don't get it or they don't want it, they won't have capacity. You obviously would address it, but if it turns into a pattern, you know, one of the best words of wisdom I ever heard is people can get better and people can change, but not much. You know what I mean? Meaning, like, if that's who they are, then that's
Yeah.
who they are, and you just need to move on with it. And so,
So, so let's take it to a long distance conflict, meaning you have a branch office that's, away from your corporate, right?
yeah.
And you put out all the protocols, maybe treatment protocols or office protocols or whatever. And the office manager, the person in charge of that location, just kind of does what they want to do as
hmm
opposed to following.
By the way, I've never had this happen as you're saying this,
Right.
ever,
Right.
ever. So
By the
yeah,
way, I'm
keep going.
not thinking of you. I'm thinking of somebody else, another client, when I say this.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But so what happens? This actually was somebody who came along from a big tea company who had the protocols, that they felt were, what should be, acted upon versus what the owner and the company, the leadership team put together, and with their entomologist or whatever.
Yeah.
And so then you had a conflict, but you didn't even know that you had a conflict because that leader
hmm
goes back to their branch and does their own thing. And then you realize that everyone is not singing off the same sheet of music.
Yeah. So there's a couple things there. Never had this happen. Just the first disclaimer.
Right.
Okay, so maybe I'm lying, but this is why it's important that you do branch visits, and this is why it's important that as an owner or a leader, get out in the field and see what's really happening for yourself. Not that people are trying to be nefarious or trying to lie to you or whatever, but I do think it's important that you know what's going on. The second thing is if you see that happening, you need to have a discussion, because I would assume this person that's on the outskirts or whatever, they're probably still attending a leadership meeting of some sort, probably weekly. It's not like they're completely oblivious. Like if you have a communication issue, I mean, I would say first thing would be to like check yourself. Have you been clear? Is it clear what needs to happen? Do they fully understand? I mean, just as a self check, because sometimes, when people are away from the home front here, they're not in the compound. I mean, communication's hard, and sometimes things don't make it to them. But in any case, after you've done this whole kind of self check, the next question is like, okay, now we need to have conflict. Why is it that we've agreed on this and you're not following through? And then if the question or if the answer comes back is like, well, we don't, that's not how we do it here, or I don't want to do that, then you need to be completely and totally transparent with that person. Say, listen, we all agree to this. And if you can't follow through, then I'm going to have to replace you. Like a legitimate, real conversation and I think that's fair. In fact, I think that's kind, because what happens is that it escalates or it keeps going and it keeps going, and the owner's getting more and more angry. And eventually one day they're like, I'm done. And meanwhile, this person's out there running their own program thinking that they know it's not okay, but it's okay because it's not
Oh,
being
it works.
practiced.
It's what
Right.
they've learned,
And
and
then
it's
someone
their
shows up one day and says, you're fired. And they're like, wait. So this whole idea of like having a real conversation with them. And by the way, in my fictitious case, okay, um, you know, this person was very close to retirement, and I said, okay, so I'm gonna intentionally let this happen for another 6 months because this is not going to be an issue after that. And there's no point in me, burning a lot of leadership capital on 6 months, and that's what I did. And then after that, it was the next person was like, okay, here's what we're doing, and and
But you
that
let
to
it go.
me,
So that was my next question is, okay, well, the path of least resistance is if it's working, just let it go, but it's not right, you know? And maybe, obviously a performance improvement might, but if you're beyond that and you say, well, I got to fire this guy, you know how difficult it is to replace people. Maybe you say,
mhm.
geez, which is the path of least resistance? What
So
says
I think
Donnie on that?
I think the reality of it is that the path of least resistance is to make the hard call up front, because I think it's going to cost you a lot more pain down the road than it is going to be up front. And I mean, listen, that doesn't mean that you make an emotional decision and that you just fire right there on the spot and then put yourself in a bad spot. But strategically, yeah,
The
I can start
problem
start
is,
recruiting.
if you're a two-person company and that's one person, you lose 50% of your staff. If
Yep,
that's four, you lose 25%. If it's 50, you'll figure it out, right? So the
right.
smaller you are, the harder it is. You have to make all kinds of decisions that are predicated on keeping an assembled workforce. And the fewer people that you have, the more impact it has on the entire organization.
Yeah. There's one more piece I want to get to here. We've got probably about another, I'd say maybe like another 10 or 15 minutes, and I really want to make sure we get to it, which is this whole idea of, how I set this up about the story in terms of I totally messed up in a meeting and just didn't realize. Like I just had I was used to operating a certain way in a meeting. I didn't read the audience. And, the prerequisite for having good and healthy conflict, and how do you bring this on? And the very first thing that is the most difficult thing to do is you have to build trust. And what that means is that, I have watched leaders do this, even in my own company, where it's impossible, no one should disagree with that leader. No one should question that leader. And so then what happens is that everyone runs around in fear. They're afraid they're going to be punished by that leader. They're afraid they're going to be humiliated by that leader, or they're going to be labeled by that leader. And it completely undermines trust of the team. And so if you're a leader where you're not checking your ego, you have a habit of punishing people that disagree with you, or you're sarcastic, or you humiliate them in front of others, or you put them in a box. They say something that you don't agree with. You are actively undermining trust, and um, you're actively putting yourself in a place where you're not going to make good decisions as a business. And again, I've had this happen here at Triangle. And so people, because the reality of it is that people realize that, like, if they come out and they disagree with you or someone else on the team and they're punished, well, I'm not going to do that again. And I've been on, I've been in a meeting at Triangle where someone said, well, I did this and here's what happened. And I replaced that leader, because ultimately, if their egos get in the way, it's going to make them a bad leader. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you've ever done this, because listen, I did it early in my career. I mean, I came from the military, not making excuses, but I was taught from, authoritative type leadership was great. It didn't work in the civilian world
No,
at all. I learned that pretty quick. The first 5 years was pretty hard because I
doesn't
had to
work
kind of.
with the children either. So
Yeah, it does not. Does not. So this whole idea of, like, the very first prerequisite is that people have to trust you and they have to trust other people on the team. And so they got to be able to disagree without fear. And what puts fear in is punishment, humiliation, or being labeled. The other one is that you've got to put some operating assumptions in place. Number one is that you always have to assume positive intent. If someone disagrees with you or you disagree with someone else, there needs to be this overriding assumption that we are trying to make the business better, not disagree with A or B or whomever, right? So, like, for example, I disagree with Dan a lot. Dan disagrees with me. It's perfectly fine. We've been in meetings before, even in peer groups. And I'll say, listen, I already know this topic Dan and I don't agree on. We've agreed that we're not going to agree on it. No big deal, right? I'm not going to be like, I'm better than Dan. Maybe I would be in a side channel. I'm kidding. I would not do that. But I mean, my point is like this whole idea that you assume positive intent and everyone in the team understands that. Like, hey, we're all here just trying to make the business better. Nothing personal, right? If I don't agree with you, fine. And the other part of it is as a leader, you got to be you almost have to be not willing to tie on to an idea until you're ready to make a decision because you know how sometimes you have confirmation bias, which is where you already have a path in your brain and every piece of information that you hear that is positive about that is like you it's like massive like yes, and everything that you hear that's negative you kind of and in the pilot world this is a really big deal, right? Because sometimes folks want to go, they're under pressure to fly somewhere, they're trying to get to a party. There's a massive store in the way. Like, oh, I can fly above it. This thing's got icing, thunderstorms in it. Like, not a big deal. We'll punch through it. See, so they will emphasize the positive. So my point here is that for you as a leader, another operating assumption that you need to put in place is that don't try not to marry yourself to any idea until it's time to make a decision because you may hear some information that you were not aware of and it may completely change your mindset. I've had that happen a couple times in meetings, and people will learn that you really do or that you really are trying to make the right decision for the business, and they're going to be more willing to speak up. The other one I would say is challenge without disrespect. Now, I actually had this happen in a meeting. This was a few years ago. A leader says this to me exactly. Says, well, I was trying to talk to you, Donnie, but then when you put that smart ass hat on, that's what the leader said to me. That's what they said. That was followed up with a write up, and it was followed up with, if you ever do that in a meeting, if you doing that to me, then what are you doing to your subordinates? That leader eventually got fired. So, so I mean, this whole
He
idea
wasn't
of,
wrong though.
well, it wasn't wrong, but my whole idea is like
He
our
was wrong in his
values and
approach, but he wasn't wrong.
well, listen,
Following.
our values are go rise, and I'm absolutely willing to enforce them all the way through, right?
Mm.
And then the last thing is being wrong is not unsafe. And this whole idea, like, listen, we all have bad ideas from time to time. It's gonna happen, no big deal. And if you have a wrong idea or something fails, but everyone agreed with it, it's not like for the rest of your career that's going to be hanging over your head, So my whole idea here is that you got to have trust in place. And sometimes people think trust like we're going to go out to a ropes course and we're all going to fall on each other and I'm not going to fall, and when I get done with that we're all going to magically trust each other. That is the pop culture bull crap. Don't fall into that mess. I mean, it's just like it may give you you may go out and have fun, but it's not going to be real trust, right? That's going to be like, okay, we went out and we did a ropes course together. If you got these behaviors where people are not assuming positive intent, they're being disrespectful in meetings, and they feel like if they say something wrong, that it's going to that's the real stuff, right? So don't fall into this whole thing. We're going to go out to a ropes course, so we're going to go do, we're going to go some activity and now we're going to all have fun and then it's going to fix things because it's just not going to happen. And so, anyways, that all makes sense, Dan. Like I said, I'm doing a lot of yapping on this
Does
episode.
let's move on to your leader moves and your meeting designs and your pitfalls and
Oh gosh, that's a lot. So we're not going to get to all of it.
oh my,
Here's,
this is you really prepared nicely for this one.
well, here's what I will tell you. So let's talk through like, how do you do it? Um, I think probably, if we're getting to the end here, we're going to talk about how do you put this in. Like, here's the practical way of doing this. As a leader, I think the first thing is that you want to talk about this whole idea of conflict and how it's okay. Even if you're, in a meeting and being like, look, my goal, explain your intent. My goal is to make good decisions. Our goal is to make good decisions. When we make good decisions, everyone in this room stands to benefit. When we mess up, everyone in this everyone in this room gets hurt in some way, shape, form, or fashion. When the company gets hurt, we all get hurt. And so then from there, once you kind of once you kind of establish that you actually want people to communicate, then you need to frame it out. And framing it out is that we attack issues, not people. We speak in the room, not around the room, right? Silence is not agreement, meaning that, sometimes when people disagree, they feel like they shouldn't say anything. And that therefore, if no one says anything, then that's agreement. So you have to make sure that folks understand if you disagree, you owe the team your view. And if you don't do that, then that's silent agreement, and that is not going to be tolerated on the team. I will intentionally ask people what they think if they're being quiet, because I want to make sure that doesn't happen. The other
Mhm.
thing that you want to lay out is like, look, we debate hard, but then full commit. You want to make sure that people understand, like, just because we're having conflict, just because everyone gets their I want to hear everything, but that doesn't mean if you don't agree with me that, now I'm going to get 50 or 70 or 80% of your commitment versus the full 100% because you don't fully agree. So it's debate hard, then fully commit. And then the last thing is, and I think this is probably the most important one, is that you leave with clear decisions, owners, and then the next steps. And so that's if you're doing L10s or whatever meetings you're doing, just make sure that you document that stuff. And that way, because if you don't, then people will be like, well, that's not what we agreed with, or that's not what we decided, when really they're bringing in this bias, probably not even consciously, that this is what we decided. And since you didn't write it down, it was actually what they wanted to decide. It may not necessarily be what was actually decided. So that's why you got to make sure that the decision is clear, it's documented, there's an owner, and then there's next steps. So anyway, that's probably the most important part as far as how you set it up. And then, some things that you want to watch, you don't want to confuse conflict with being harsh, meaning like, conflict is not bluntness. It's mainly clarity with control, meaning like, and what I'm saying by that is that the language that you use, like I was wrong in saying that was the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I should have said, I should have asked more questions, right? So that's number one. That's a
You
pitfall.
realize this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard?
Yeah.
Is that the right question?
It's like I should have been better. Like I said, I should have read the audience better. The
Uh-huh.
second one is that, and I've seen this happen a lot, which is
That's the
where
sarcasm.
it is the sarcasm, where you've got someone on your team who's super loud and they win all the time. And that's because they dominate the mic time.
Mhm.
They're
Yeah.
very
Yep.
confrontational, and then all of a sudden it's like no one wants to like either argue with that person, or no one gets any airtime. And so you just gotta manage that. Be like, you know what? I've heard your view. Now I need to hear opposing views, and then that way it's like you move on from the loudest voice, because if you don't do that, that person's going to end up being the leader of the team. You got to watch that.
Mhm.
Um, the third thing, I know we got to finish up here, which is allowing back channels to stay normal. So, a back channel is where someone brings up a concern outside the meeting that was not voiced in the meeting. If that happens, it's a public hanging, and I mean, it absolutely you need to address it
Well,
and
what
not
if it's
allow that to
something
happen.
that nobody considered and afterwards it was an afterthought?
Well,
Like,
then you bring it up in the next meeting in front of everyone. You don't have side discussions about it, right? Um, and then the other thing is that, this whole idea of conflict never turns into commitment, which means that when you finish up with a decision, you ask the question, can everyone commit to this? And if the question is, if not, what would need to be true in order for you to commit? And ultimately, again, you're the decision maker. Everyone needs to know that. Um, but you want to make sure that everyone can commit to it once you have made a decision. And then the last one, and this is a big one,
no,
we're going
I
to be
like
done.
that you can everybody commit to it because, yeah, everybody can get quiet. But if you have somebody who can't commit to it, how do you bring them
Right,
around? Or you
right.
think that that's important.
And a lot of times these little behavior things are pretty easy to put in place. And after a month or two, everyone kind of finds like they start trusting and it gets easy. The very first 2 months of this, it's going to be kind of awkward, and you're going to have to really be intentional about bringing this out. All
Hmm.
right. And this is the last one. This is a big one because I see it happen, and you want to make sure that you get in front of it. People using Slack or email for conflict. Never do that. Never allow it. If you see something like that happening, train yourself and train your leaders. Like, we're going to put it on the agenda. We're going to talk about it, right? Because
Email is the
endless time, gosh,
worst.
I've got to show my ways right. Just all the stuff that comes with that. Like, you just want to eliminate it all and be like, hey, yep, that's a great, let's add it to the agenda. We're going to talk about it. Because when people get in front of each other, they act very differently than when they're sitting in front of a email editor or a Slack, message. You got to get in front of that. So, all righty. All right, Mr. Dan, what else do you have there to add to that? That's it. I mean, there's more things that we could talk about, but we're out of time. Anything you
I
want to add
think,
before we finish out?
yeah, no, I think that you covered it nicely. And I think that everybody goes through it, right? So we have it at the accounting firm, we have it in our peer groups, we have it, you and I, with the podcast. I mean, it's part of everyday life. But I think if you can manage it and you don't have a temper tantrum, which as you get older, seriously,
Yeah,
I'm not saying that young people have temper tantrums. It's just when I was young.
right.
That's
Oh, yeah.
not that I'm old
Yeah.
now, but you definitely learn to temper it a little bit and then look at other views. But remember, business is not a democracy, and so you have to end it with a decision, whether that decision is popular or not. It's what you know to be true, and I
Hmm.
think that's important.
Yeah, I think the main thing is this is just remember that, conflict in the room is way better than conflict in the hallway.
That's
And
right.
you want, as a leader, you want just a simple system, right? Your system is that we debate, we all know how to debate, we all know how to have healthy conflict, and then ultimately we're going to convert that debate into clarity and commitment. And if you can do that and manage that as a leader, I'm telling you, you're 10, maybe even 100 times better than most. And so with that, we're going to finish out. Just a reminder, all the resources and topics that we talked about today are going to be available on the podcast website. Just take a look at pmpindustryinsider.com. Take a look under show notes. Maybe we'll put a link up to Dan's back brace on there on Amazon if you've got similar issues going on. I always appreciate any
Yeah.
ratings and
Well,
reviews.
the one thing that we need to do is Donnie has really stepped up his game. If you noticed, he used to wear T-shirts, and now he's got a shirt on, and that's a result of his wife calling him a
And
slut.
that would be an example of a personal attack of conflict,
Yes.
but we're going to,
Right.
and with that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye bye now.